Okay, I'm Don, and I'm speaking on behalf of my wife, who really wrote all this and was going to do all the heavy lifting, and then she's got a cold, so I get to do it. I'm trimming it up a little bit from what we originally had written here, but my son was as a patient at the Alberta hospital for the last 15 years. And after he was finally in their care, we noticed his brain injury wasn't addressed, no rehabilitation was offered, excessive doses of antipsychotics and other psychotropic drugs were prescribed with horrendous adverse effects. Counseling was withheld, pastoral help was not permitted, and visitors were severely restricted. As a result of this, he was treated with ever-increasing doses of even more powerful antipsychotic drugs. The side effects of these drugs are both frightening and eventually irreversible. Our son was soon in a perpetual state of misery and anguish and frequent panic attacks and suicidal thoughts and attempts. He attempted suicide several times, which to me I just thought was a rational approach. You know, you can't get away, the only escape is death. Anyway.
Drugs that cause it.
What's that?
The drugs cause suicide.
She's saying the drugs are what caused him to feel.
Yeah. I mean, he's being tortured, you know, like how do you avoid torture? We contacted many authorities and were consistently told that they could not or would not interfere with the doctor's decisions. The treatment team is God. These drug-induced symptoms included oculogyric crisis, which meant his eyes were rolling back in his head. Severe panic from the drug-induced psychosis, which caused him to hear terrifying and taunting voices. His eyes rolled up with such force that many times he thought they were bleeding. He would ask Anne when she visited him if he could see blood in his eyes, because his eyes would be so forced back. The panic attacks and hallucinations increased when high dosages of medication leading him to be suicidal. We also observed that higher doses did not benefit him over lower doses. However, with these high doses, he experienced excruciating torment. Due to the high dosing, he developed neurological damage, tardive dyskinesia, which means he shakes in his hands and that sort of thing, and an inner restlessness and restless leg. He used to be 20/10 vision, now he needs glasses. He had eye damage. Just skip ahead here. At one time, our son's condition had deteriorated to such a degree that comments were made by the staff that he looked like Frankenstein by his demeanor and gait. They couldn't understand how he was able to keep his balance. He developed a Parkinsonian gait, shuffling and stumbling forward as he walked. I mean, if you've ever been in a mental hospital, there's so many people walking around that are, you know, that's the drugs. I mean, anyway. Even with this degree of disability from the large doses of antipsychotics, his doctor's intent was to increase his medication yet again. It was only after consultation that Anne requested that his symptoms improved as the medication was lowered. However, because his doctor continued to disagree with the consulting neuropsychiatrist, which Anne had obtained, and refused to believe that our son was experiencing supersensitivity when the opportunity arose, he again increased our son's medication to intolerable levels, crippling him with mental anguish. And then I'll talk a little bit about solitary confinement, which I just think it's absolutely horrific. Just to describe solitary at Alberta Hospital, he was put in a room with what they call a hard canvas, so he could sleep on that, on the floor. And he was given a hard piece of canvas to wrap around his body for the warmth, and in a diaper. And then he would be fed through a hole in the door with a little window, and they'd put the food in there, and they had a curtain on the other side because they said, we don't want him stimulated by the outside environment, so they would keep the curtain closed. They could open it any time and look and see what he's doing, but he couldn't look out. And there was a TV across the room, but we don't want him watching television because this is not good treatment, right? Anyway, he would poop in the diaper and he'd poke that through the hole and they would take care of that, and then his food would come through on the other side. And he was left in there. Now, the longest period of time he was in was for 9 months, but his total time in isolation was around 30 months because he was periods of 5, 7, 8, 9 months in seclusion. And they call this treatment, right? I mean, if you've read anything, you know that people go crazy when they're kept in solitary for an indefinite period of time. Now, he was he frequently had takedowns and forced injections with a drug that sent him in agony and panic for 3 days, with hallucinations, muscle rigidity, body contortions, eyes rolling up, and fainting spells. He'd fallen and lacerated his face. The staff would remove his clothing. This is on the times when he wasn't in solitary. They remove his clothing and what happened here? Come back to find.
It just cuts out, so you gotta just keep going.
You keep going, okay.
Keep talking.
Yeah, he would, the staff would remove his clothing so that he couldn't attempt suicide, but after one injection, they failed to remove his clothes and they came back to find him blue with his pajamas wrapped around his neck, so tightly wrapped they had difficulty cutting it off. Okay, and during one lengthy confinement, he was left in seclusion in a state of panic in a drug-induced state for several hours behind the locked doors after a routine monthly injection. He had requested side effect medication several times, however, the staff refused to give it to him. He became extremely suicidal. The prevalent attitude of his doctor and staff was that our son didn't need side effect medication. He was faking his symptoms. It wasn't until the evening nurse came on shift later that day and found him twitching in his bed with his eyes rolled up that he was immediately received an injection of side effect medication. Even with this degree of distress, his medication dosage was not decreased. He continued to suffer. However, after this event, he was given daily side effect medications which helped alleviate the adverse effects. But they in themselves cause health problems. I mean, the side effect medication was Ativan, which makes him sleepy. So he started drinking a lot of coffee because he didn't want to be completely dozy all the time. After 8 months in solitary confinement, he was taken to emergency because he was found unresponsive in his room. He later became responsive en route to the hospital. After not being permitted to see him for many months, we were able to sit with him in emergency. He was courteous to staff, but was very afraid he would be forcibly ejected. He settled when they assured him that they would not be giving him any needles. Okay, let's get quickly to the. Okay, we were trying to solve the problem, so we suggested to the doctor, please just shackle him and put cuffs on him and let him have some social interaction rather than being in isolation all the time. And take him out for some fresh air, which he hadn't had since the spring of the previous year. The doctor's response was they couldn't cuff him or shackle him. I don't know why. But he agreed to try him out of his seclusion room. I think he thought he'd probably just do something stupid. But anyway, to his surprise, our son improved when he was introduced to the ward. He presented no problems. He was soon mingling with other patients. He improved, and no further increase in medication was necessary. He continued to progress, and when it appeared he was making headway, was being integrated in the community, his privileges were abruptly cut. His privileges in the community, he was able to come to our place for a couple of days a week, and he could go to the YMCA and he could go to church. His privileges were abruptly cut in last December of 18 over an apology he'd made to a former staff member on social media. Based on church, they said that he should apologize to everybody he's ever offended. So he looked her up on Facebook and he said, I'm very sorry the way I acted in solitary, right? Anyway, she perceived this correspondence as harassment, apparently because of some disturbing things he had said while in solitary. Now his psychiatrist wants to increase his medication again, even though prior to this incident we were told he was doing very well, deemed well enough to integrate into the community and come home. He's been isolated now for the last 4 months, albeit not in solitary. He just recently was allowed to go outside under supervised smoke break 4 times a day when other staff, the staff take out a few patients at a time. But he can't go out unsupervised. And we want to emphasize what's being lost with the loss of privileges. Our son was regularly being put in contact with people who intentionally treated him in a loving and friendly manner. He had gained city privileges last year and enjoyed making new friendships. Our church community was very supportive, and he fared well in the community and at home. Aides and staff can only treat him in a professional manner, but at best, hardly, but anyway, at best, he will have a hard time treating him, but we'll have a hard time treating him with casual friendliness that a large and embracing community can. It's practically impossible for our son to not act like a caged person if his only contact is staff doing their best to be professional and other patients. Our son is withdrawn and insecure because he suffered long incarceration and has done things and had things done to him that would haunt anybody. Numerous abuses. It takes a long time to draw someone like that out of their shell, and now denying him a community is just egregious. And to deny him access to dozens of potential interactions per week is very regressive. I can't understand. It just baffles me that they call this treatment. It's hardly a hospital, and I don't think they're doctors. We don't believe that this model of treatment gives our son any chance of recovery. If it continues, there will be little hope for our son to experience any semblance of a normal life. And as parents, we'd be remiss in our duties if we didn't do everything in our power to see that he's given every advantage and every chance to salvage a life for himself. His treatment leaves him incapable of any positive change. This is a good line, I thought. In ancient wars, victorious soldiers would cut the hamstring of enemy horses and soldiers, leaving them incapable of rejoining the battle. I believe that our son is being hamstrung by a medical community that believes a hopeless life is the best we can hope for. Under the current treatment, he's not making any progress toward reaching his life's goals. In fact, the current treatment precludes it altogether. Our son is being made a cripple. He is given no hope of a meaningful recovery. I believe we can and must set the bar higher. Thank you.